Microsoft Azure State of the Art with Lars Klint.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. This podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure. They are a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient and able to deliver world-class results through its ClearMeasure Way methodology. Another announcement, my architect forums are going strong. Signups for the next session are up. And if you lead a software team and are looking to collaborate with peer architect leaders, just go ahead and sign up at the link in the show notes. And for those of you who are looking for Programming with Palermo, my video podcast, just go ahead and search for it in any of the directories or on YouTube, and you'll be able to find it. So our guest today on the show is Lars Klint, and he is a senior developer advocate with Pluralsight. He's an author, trainer, Microsoft Azure MVP, community leader, aspiring YouTube host, and part-time classic car collector. He's heavily involved in the space of cloud computing services, especially Azure, and is a published author, solution architect, and writer for numerous publications. He's been a part of the software development community for the past 20 years and co-organizes the Domain-Driven Design Melbourne Community Conference, or DDD Melbourne Community Conference. He also organizes developer events with Microsoft and runs a part-time car restoration business. Lars has spoken at numerous technical events around the world and also is an expert in the Australian Outback Internet. Lars, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Thanks, Jeff. I'm good. Yeah, it always brings a bit of a chuckle, that last one.
Well, I'll admit, I don't know much about the Australian Outback Internet. What is that?
It's not an actual thing, but because I don't live in the Outback, but I live in rural Australia on a farm. And when we first moved here about 8 years ago, there was no internet. Mm-hmm. Like, we had one of the old school satellite connections and no mobile coverage at all. So I've learned how to daisy chain things and make something work. You know, I used to drive my old Jeep up the top of the hill to download things because there'll be a connection there.
Nice.
And then drive down and work on it, sort of thing. So yeah, it's been a journey. But we're on Starlink now, so maybe I should change that in the bio because it's amazing.
That's right. We're actually using Zoom, and there's no jitter on the video feed. It's perfectly clear. So that's great.
Yep. It used to be the joke that if I was on the call, it'd be like, oh, yeah, no, Lars, he'll be back. He's just dropped out. It's fine, kind of thing. I did one event where we pre-recorded something, and my entire skit in like 9 people joining a Zoom call, it was all, edited. Right. It was just me joining for like 6 seconds and completely pixelated and dropping out, and that was gone. That was it.
Oh, gosh.
But yeah, no, it's not like that anymore.
Well, speaking of daisy chaining things together, I've had some pretty good luck with the Ubiquity Unify radios, just kind of slinging the network across trees or...
yeah.
And those, for just a casual user to stick it up and follow the instructions, they seem to work pretty good.
Oh, yeah. Well, we can do a whole podcast on my farm Wi-Fi setup, but that's probably not why we're here.
Well, heck, that's a type of network, and Azure has a lot of networking, and let's talk about that a little bit because you're writing a book on Azure. But before we get into that, kind of go backwards and share with the listeners a little bit about your background and how you kind of came into programming and this part of the IT industry, and what are the big moments that led you to work on what you're working on today?
Well, I've always been interested in technology, even when I didn't know I was interested in technology. So when I was about 8 or 9, I bought a Commodore 64 with my paper route money. And that was hard going. I really wanted this thing because I couldn't get a job as an 8-year-old. You don't get a paper route. So I was helping my brother, with my older brother.
Right.
And of course, being the salesman he is, he made me do half the work for, a third of the money, right?
Of course.
Because what other choice did I have? So it sort of started there with hard work, rain, hail, shine, snow, whatever, right? And that brought me sort of to having the first experience with computing. And then at school, we had some Armstrads. I don't know if you've ever been introduced to the Armstrad, the British computer, I think. But the
Okay.
cool thing was that it had a color screen. Like, it was just like, holy moly. And I started doing a bit of programming. I didn't even know it was programming at the time, but it was the old school basic of, 10, print something, 20, go to 10, and it would go on forever kind of thing, right? You go, ooh, that's fun. So I got an early start to it. And then I've just been interested in especially computers, the personal computers since I was about 14 or something. And the funny thing was, because I like numbers and mathematics and logic and stuff, I thought, well, I'm going to be an accountant. I didn't even consider computers as a career choice. And then when I was about 18, I worked as an accountant, and then I knew I was not going to be an accountant. So it sort of started from there. And I moved to Australia from Denmark to study computer science, because I was working for telco in Denmark. I was doing the sort of specifications of billing systems and functions and features, but never the actual implementation. And I was like, how do I get to do the fun bit, like building the thing? And I realized that I need a degree for that. So I moved to Australia, of all places, to do my uni degree, which I did. And it sort of just escalated from there. And then I realized relatively early on that I was one of those nerds that don't mind talking to people. So I would get brought out to customers to talk to them and figure out what they wanted, and have, because my approach has always been sort of casual and relaxed, and it works in a lot of cases. I did a lot of work with trucking companies in Australia. If you show up in a suit, you're going to get sort of shown the door almost, right? So that sort of escalated from there. And now in the past 10 years, I guess, I've been much more encouraging people to learn. For me, that moment when a new learner or a student or whoever gets that light bulb moment, and you explain a thing and you can just see them go, oh, I get it. That's amazing. Like that's basically what I live for. I find it incredibly rewarding, because I think technology is one of those things that can genuinely transform everything you do, where you live, how you work. Like, there's nothing like it. So, and then cloud computing is just my bag. I've done Azure for 10 years now or something, I think. I don't know, not quite since the start, but I was working with web roles and worker roles, all that stuff way back when the Azure portal was in Silverlight.
Sure.
Yeah, good old days. So that's sort of the brief story of how I got here, I guess. Anything you want to know apart from that?
And you've decided to write a book, and tell us about that and the status, and what in God's green earth made you decide to write a book?
Because I have no common sense. No, that's not true. I wanted to write a book for me. Don't ever go into tech writing to make a living from it, I would argue, unless you are really, really, really quick and good and passionate about it. It's something I wanted to have, me having the experience saying, hey, I wrote this, right? Even if I'm the only one that reads it, that's fine. I don't think that's the case. I'm applying my own style to the book writing. So it's very conversational. I can't have that whole like reference guide type approach, but it's very casual. It's very conversational. It's very me telling you, hey, I'm in charge. You do what I tell you, like in a tongue-in-cheek way. It's just me trying to get my personality into the book. And so far it's going well. It's selling well, even though I haven't finished it, which I find incredible. But that also puts the pressure on me to go, oh, I better finish the damn thing, because now people are actually waiting for the finished product as well. But no, you can buy it and you can read what I've written so far, and you can get sort of part of the journey and provide feedback as I go through it. But yeah, it was definitely for me that I chose to do it. So it's a book on Azure, surprise, called Microsoft Azure in Action. It's one of Manning publications series called In Action, which is very hands-on. So it's a lot of, now you do this, like there's no sort of theory. You just go straight into, hey, type this command in, I'll tell you why it's good or what happens or whatever it does.
Yeah.
So I find that good. I like writing that style. I'm just not very fast at it.
Well, we will make sure to include a link to that book in the show notes so that folks can read it right now, even though it's roughly half done. Yeah, with the early access program. Yeah, they can read the chapters that are there now, even while you're writing the next ones, as I understand it.
Exactly.
So,
and it'll change. It's
yeah.
because it takes a long time to write a book. So chapter 2 that I wrote a year ago, well, that's not going to be the same chapter 2 that gets published probably, because I need to change things, because, well, cloud computing moves pretty fast.
Right.
Yeah.
So then the big question is, Azure is huge. You've had to decide what parts of Azure to actually include in the book, because you can't possibly include everything. And so then the overall question, okay, what part of Azure should developers be using more than less?
No, it includes everything. It's 14,000 pages. It's fun.
Oh, wow.
No, of course I couldn't do that. And that was a real, not a problem, but a challenge, I guess. Early on, I was like, no, it can be done. So I'm focusing more on, it's quite evergreen, or that's the intention at least. So I'm not sort of going into details on a particular niche service or feature, because it may change. But I'm giving you an idea of, well, this is what. So it's meant for, let me just go with the audience, that it's meant for people that are either already a little bit familiar with maybe another cloud and haven't looked at Azure, or have been in software development for a while, but are sort of trying to figure out what this cloud thing is. So it's not meant for people that have never looked at tech. That's not the intention. The intention is that you want to upskill in Azure, and you want to sort of get a general gist of the things that you can do. And of course, I had to pick and choose some of the topics. So I'm starting with what I call the fundamentals in cloud, which is compute, network, and storage, because you can't do anything in cloud without those three, or computing in general, really, if you want to be specific. But in cloud, in particular, I've sort of honed in on, and then go from there. We build on that. So the thing I'm currently writing is, well, we've already talked about storage, but what can you do that's really kind of cool with storage that you might not have considered? Like, you can have a static website, just hosted directly on your storage account, or whatever it might be. And it's all wrapped up in, interesting scenarios and projects. I made up companies. I have Alpaca Bags, which is a company that does hair care products for alpacas. It's silly things like that, but it makes the learning journey much more interesting. So yeah, I've had to choose. I've definitely had to choose. And when you start writing it, there was, for example, chapter 7, I wrote once and I actually threw it out, because what I've chosen, the services I've chosen, were just like, well, it just doesn't work.
Right.
It's just, even though they're really cool services, I really like the way that you should know about it, but I couldn't get it to work. So I threw it out and I started again, and I made it work with a different scenario. So there's learning journeys for me writing it, 100%. And will I get it all right? Probably not, but I'm going to make my best effort that I can. But yeah, so I have to choose. For example, did I include DevOps? I decided not to. Right, we can write a whole book on DevOps.
Yeah.
But it was a hard thing to sort of figure out. But then I have everything around the DevOps. So all the things that you would put inside of your DevOps pipelines or your builds or whatever. So there's definitely been sort of decisions on that were difficult, because otherwise you'll never end.
I'm looking at your table of contents, and you go through Azure functions, and then go through an example of image processing and virtual machines and networking, storage, security, and serverless. And just from the progress of Azure, there's been so many different implementations of the same things as they refine and refine and refine. Networking is one of those where there's so many buttons and knobs and things you can do with networking, express route and point to point and all that stuff. But through it all, what ideas have risen to the surface for general internal business application developers? What types of networking, for example, should they be using in Azure when they put their applications there?
So the bits in networking in particular that I focused on were, so I'm a software developer by trade. I've written code for 20 years. I don't know a ton about the ops side, right? The sysadmin or the IT ops side. So it's like, okay, what would I want to know about that as a developer to both make my life easier in the cloud, but also to make sure that I don't step on someone else's toes, right? How do I not screw it up, basically? So I focused on those things. So that would be like subnets, VNet peering, routing, understanding what a VPN is or express route, if that's a part of your setup. If someone said, well, if we're using express route, what does that mean? How do you use a load balancer? Because it will absolutely have an impact on your software and your application running. So how does the load balancer impact that? But again, I only have 25 pages per chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's more of you need to know there's two parts. So you need to know what sort of is in general in Azure, but you also need to know what you don't know. Right. So having that toolbox of, concepts almost is incredibly valuable when you start out using Azure. And yeah, you could write a whole book. There's a whole certification exam just on networking. So yeah, it's a massive, massive area. And I don't pretend to know all of it, not even half, right? So I've sort of picked up the bits I wanted to know as a software dev.
Sure.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery. ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
What is your thought on databases? In the cloud world, there's so much talk, the table storage and Mongo or Cosmo, and databases still persist. What's your thinking on that topic?
It's a tricky one because there are many, many thoughts and approaches to how you store and manipulate and extract data, right? You want to get the data out again. And sometimes you need to figure out what the best case is for the project. Sometimes you're constrained by the what you already have. So in your company, you might say, well, we already have a Cosmos DB. We're using that. You go, okay, well, but I made it work then. Or they say, well, we always use SQL and we have all the expertise for SQL. Well, I'm going to have to use that. But if you have a choice of which way to go, well, you got to figure out which one is the better option.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tricky because I have got this question before, and some people compare it to like programming languages where they go, well, just use the one you're really good at. I'm like, no, not with databases, because it has a genuine impact on performance, on scalability. So it's really important to get that right. Whereas if you choose Java or C#, it doesn't make too much of a difference. It may be a little bit here and there, but you can make both work. Whereas if you accidentally chose MongoDB over MS SQL, there's a big difference, right? It fundamentally changes how you approach data. The right answer is it depends, but that's not very useful. So it's a matter of understanding your data as best as you can, because as we all know, working in tech, it changes tomorrow. But what information do you have today to make a decision? So if you have super relational data and you're going to use it in that way, well, SQL or MySQL or something is probably a good choice. Whereas if you sort of go, well, I know it's going to be like the orders we get in are going to be all different, like all types of widgets. Well, maybe a NoSQL type approach is better. But then again, if you know that you're going to have massively distributed stuff that needs to be super fast, well, maybe Cosmos is the right approach, right? So you got to figure out what is the business wanting out of this data? Where's the business value? How do you make yourself look the best?
Yeah, that's a good point. I was talking with a client just last week, and it was a CEO of a technology company, and he was talking about performance problems with relational database. And it turns out, well, there was one single relational database with tables of all kinds with conflicting indexes, and really it should have been two different databases, one write optimized, one read optimized. And in education that I've seen and the guidance that's out there in documentation, the focus is on how to use a particular storage service, not how many you should use for what types, right? Because in real applications, isn't it rare that there's only one way to store data across every single feature, even if it's only transactional versus reporting? I mean, that automatically gives you two, right?
Absolutely. I don't think I've ever seen a decent sized project, let's say, like enterprise size, that doesn't have multiple different types of data for this that represents the same object essentially. but there's real value. So I used to work for a big classified company in Australia and sell all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to report on this, and there was, in this particular case, it was cars. They had all this car data on sold cars, car prices, features, all sorts of things. They wanted to sell this data, basically the car pricing data,
Mm-hmm.
to car dealers, so they knew what the general price was for cars, right? So
Sure.
they were, hey, we can give you this feature in real time on what cars are worth. But to enable that, they had to build a whole new data warehousing system because it just wouldn't scale otherwise to do it in real time. So that absolutely, you're never going to get. I don't think you ever get this perfect greenfield scenario where we just have this one perfect database. No, it's not happening.
Yeah, but so much language of the jargon is, and then we write it to the database as opposed to anyway. And queues.
Yeah,
queues are storage services. So we sometimes
underestimate it.
Yeah. So well,
it's amazing how much you can fix with the storage queue.
So do you go over Azure Service Bus or any of those in the book?
I don't do Service Bus, but I do go over storage queues.
The queues?
Yeah, because I think as an introduction, as a first thing, it's like, let me show you some of the things that are often glossed over because they're not sexy enough, right? And Azure queues, storage queues, are just so powerful because if you're not familiar with storage queues, dear listener, it's basically you can add whatever queue items you want in one end, and you just hammer it, just put them in there, and you can have something in the other end that just takes one off at a time, all in their own good time. Or you can have 10 things doing it fast, whatever you prefer. So it's a little bit like a service bus, but you just do it through your storage account.
What are some of your favorite scenarios where you would reach for a queue?
Something like if you have a website, let's say, that would sell, I don't know, widgets, right? And you have these Black Friday type scenarios, right? So generally you just have a standard order queue that just, their pipeline is all pretty much predictable. And then you have these massive spikes. Well, why not just have everything go through a queue? It doesn't cost you anything to run. It's just on your storage account. So you just pay for the storage you're using. And then when these triggers things are, and you slowly scale up to, 10 instances of your Azure App Service, you just use the same storage queue and it just gets hammered, but it just handles it. So yeah, the orders might be processed a little bit slower on the downstream part of it, but they'll get there. So those sort of spiky things, I've used them for, and it just performs so exceptionally well.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Azure App Service. So much of the documentation and conference talks talk about, use an Azure function and have it be a listener and all that. But talk about how you would decipher in your own architectural decisions on whether to use app service or function or this or that in order to make a queue reader.
Yeah. Interesting question, because I love Azure Functions as a concept. I think it's fantastic. It's super quick. It requires very little effort to get something going. And there's bindings, as they're called, which you can, bind to your SQL Server, bind to your store, your queue storage, or whatever it is, that comes for free from Azure size in the framework for functions. And because of that, it's super quick to do it. Although sometimes you sort of get caught out a little bit because there is a limit on functions as well, right? Especially if you look at the way you host them. And it's one I've gone through this in many conference talks. How you host functions it has a real impact on how they perform, but also on your costs. And no one ever considered costs until it's too late. So if you have an app service, right, it'll be on an app service plan, which is a VM essentially. And if you have an app service plan, what are you using it for? This piece of compute that you've bought and you pay for monthly, what are you using it for? People go, I have my app service on it. Okay, and what else? And they go, what do you mean, what else? And then very few people realize that they can host functions on that app service plan, right? So they become free type of thing. So the caveat with that is that, then now you're restricted by the app service plan, right? So it's never perfect. But then that will scale, or maybe it won't. So in terms of when you say architecture, it's like, yeah, you got to have this billing side of the thing when you design stuff and be careful of budgets. But then when you do that, you got to watch the other side of it, which is the performance and the implementation of it. So when you do it, say with a queue storage, as your example is, when would I use it? I think functions would be if it's sort of a simple. If I have a single almost API, it's not an API, but an endpoint for a function that does a thing, well, that can feed into a queue, right? And maybe if I then have 3 different things that do the same, that have the same format kind of thing, they can all go into the same queue. But if it gets much bigger than that, almost like API size, I tend to go down the app service path, mainly for 2 reasons. One is that I can better manage it in my code base, because having many functions gets really tricky to manage. It becomes a bit of a logic nightmare. Whereas if I have a web API project in .NET or something, then I have a project that is my API and I can manage that through my app service. And then some of those APIs may pump into a queue storage, one or more queue storages. But I have seen really big APIs that are all built with function endpoints. And you can do that, but you really need to be very disciplined in how you manage it and architect it.
Yeah. With app service, and we've had Stefan Shakow, one of the architects of Azure App Service, on the show, and he's basically shared that kind of the 80-20 rule, Azure App Service is by far the most popular service. And so users of it know that you can have multiple apps in the same app service plan and kind of use the fullness of that virtual server underneath the covers. What is your thought process in when to just maybe create a service worker inside your website to read from that queue versus create a second app that is installed into the app service plan?
Well, kind of, if you could write it as a command line, it's probably a service worker, right? Like if you can actually make it a command line tool, if it's that sort of size, as a rule of thumb. Because, yeah, you're right. There are inside app service plans you can have. Are they called service workers now? I can never remember the terminology. But basically processes that run.
Well, the service worker is just inside ASP.NET Core. I mean, that's not even an Azure term. It's a
now
.NET
I have to
term.
look up the terminology.
Yeah.
See, even when you're an Azure MVP, you get modeled with the naming of everything.
Well, they keep changing it.
They do keep changing it. I'm just going to look here.
But even if we have a single web application, it's a single processor running in an app service, and even that single process can host, a number of service worker objects that all kind of do their own thing. It's kind of like their own independent actor. Yeah,
it's architecture, isn't it? It's interesting because everybody has their own opinion on and there's so many right solutions as well. So that's a good question. I would tend to have less app services. Less app services and more logic inside of the app service. I think as a developer, that makes it easier for me to manage. Whereas if I have 100 app services, even if they're just little ones that run on the same app service plan, I still find it becomes a nightmare to manage. But that's just my opinion, right? Someone else might have it the other way around if they prefer that.
Well, there's so much software you can run in Azure. How do you put your mind around the concept of monitoring it all? Like, what should every developer make sure to do so that they have some information about how the software and all the different pieces of it are running?
There's one major thing I think I'll be surprised if anyone that does development Azure doesn't say this, and it's application insights. Like if you don't run application insights on it's actually in more services now, but your app services in particular, well, you're just losing out. There is so much data that gets collected about how your service is running, and in particular about performance. If you have, say, suddenly your website takes 8 seconds to load up on cold start, and you go, it used to be like 2. Why is this slow now? Where do you go to look? Like, how do you figure that out? You can see it's slow, and you get the metric that says it's slow, and people are telling you it's slow, but how do you figure it out? And in application insights, you can sort of drill down and say, well, it's that process. Okay, it's that process. What does the stack trace look like for that process? Like, you can just keep drilling down, and you can set up alerts and metrics, and you can look at them live. Like, you can actually click on buttons and see what happens in live, not replay, it's not replay, but live events, right?
Mm-hmm.
incredibly useful tool. I've considered doing conference talks on application insights, but it's not that interesting unless you're in it. It's a fantastic tool.
Let's all talk about brushing our teeth, folks.
Yeah, it's a bit like that.
Right. Well, you also have a YouTube channel. Tell us about that.
I do. Yeah, I do have a YouTube channel. So because my day job is, as you said in the intro, is I'm a DevRel or dev advocate for Pluralsight.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I do technology and I do lots of videos and I help people in live streams and I do webinars and all that sort of stuff. So I thought, okay, how do I tickle my creative mind in another way? How do I, if I have an idea, how do I not have to wait for approval kind of thing to do it at work? Well, YouTube. And then because I live on a farm, I started just filming what I do on the farm, which is technology. So the channel over a couple of years has evolved to be home automation, or farm automation, as I sometimes call it, and networking equipment with a sprinkling of sort of Lego building or things and cars. But majority is home automation and networking. And it's a fantastic outlet for sharing that knowledge, because sometimes, as an example, I did a video on how to use Bluetooth and Home Assistant. Mm-hmm. So Home Assistant is a community-sourced home automation project that anyone can download and use for free. And I wanted to use Bluetooth devices with this so they feed into it. I'm like, how do I even do that? I had no idea. So I just recorded myself figuring it out. And that has, in a couple of months, for me is a lot. It's had like 8,000 views or something. And I'm like, wow, okay, people actually want to know that. And then another video I have about how to automate my water tank, figure out how much water's in it at any given time and set up alerts and stuff. I've had like over 100 comments because apparently that's a thing people really want to do. So those things are like, well, I'm building in my own community around my channel now because I reply to all comments and I learn as much from those comments as I do when I do the videos. Mm-hmm. And it's just become a real passion project. And as we were talking about before we started recording, I bought a new dolly thing to, make my video footage more interesting. So it's a great way to sort of have that creative outlet of, well, it's just me that's in charge. And it's stuff that I do anyway. Only a couple of videos I've sort of had to make up because I was short on content, but everything else is stuff I do anyway. Yeah. So that's what kind of makes it real.
So funny thing, I about 2.5 years ago, I was putting a new network rack together and I was researching all kinds of equipment and researching Ubiquity. And I've watched a number of your videos, like the one where you outfitted Unify Protect to wave the key card to release the magnetic lock and open up the door, and a number of other things. Your Ubiquity Farm Wi-Fi, because you've done so much on Ubiquity that I was researching. So it's not just a small YouTube channel. I mean, it's well searched, and so it was helpful to me several years ago.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's good fun, and it's when you have that tech angle and that nerdiness to inquisitive nature of, hey, I wish I could get a swipe card on this old 1950s door I have, right? How would I do that? And then because I don't want this to be a Ubiquity advertisement, but I am a big fan of their products, and it just works well. So now my door camera now works with the app I have. So then I can now integrate it with like the lights I have above me here are the Ubiquity LED panels. So I can then integrate them with, it all works together, and it just becomes sort of a, what's the right word? But I make my everyday a little bit better by having technology in the right ways. Yeah. And I love it for that.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Well, we could probably go off on a whole nother show on that topic, but
I think so.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, hey, thanks so much for coming on the Azure DevOps podcast and giving us the latest in Azure. And of course, we all look forward to your book. We'll include all the links in the show notes. But
anytime.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jeff.
And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.